Chief, give me a thumbs up if you're ready. Ron, you good to go? All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second and final virtual town hall hosted by the City of Grand Rapids to address the GRPD's interest in implementing gunfire detection technology. In a moment, I will introduce Chief of Police Eric Payne, who is joined by Deputy Chiefs David Kittle and Scott Reifenberg. Chief Payne will introduce our presenters this evening from ShotSpotter. In keeping with the GRPD's strategic plan and commitment to raise the community's voice regarding police operations, we are hosting this virtual town hall to provide the information, answer questions, and record opinions regarding this initiative. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will take questions from callers and those of us following us on Facebook. Reach us by phone to ask a question at the conclusion of the presentation. Feel free to call area code 616-456-3523. Now, without further ado, Chief of Police Eric Payne.
Thank you, Sergeant Adams, for the introduction, and good evening. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight to learn more about ShotSpotter, a gunfire detection technology that Grand Rapids is considering as one tool to combat the recent increase in gun violence across our city. Gun violence is the highest we've seen in at least 25 years. Weapons firing is up 209% over last year. Aggravated assault with gun is up over 65%, and homicides are up 200%. I don't believe ShotSpotter is the whole answer to this violence, but I do think it is a tool that would help us and reduce the violence. Our recent successful gun buyback was yet another tool. One of our objectives in our recent 3-year strategic plan is to leverage technological opportunities to decrease crime and increase efficiencies while earning objective and constitutional use and accountability. Gunfire detection is one of those technologies. Unmanned aerial systems are another technology we'll be looking at soon, a tool we think can be used to not only make GRPD more effective in crime fighting, but also more efficient. We will hold similar town halls regarding the use of unmanned aerial systems in the near future. These technological enhancements would allow us to respond to crime events more efficiently and more deliberately, with improved operational intelligence, with a proactive emphasis on officers, citizens, and community safety. It is our goal to ensure our community is well educated on these technologies and to ensure we use these technologies in a constitutional manner that protect the rights of our residents and visitors. I would now like to introduce Trish Lane and Ron Teachman from ShotSpotter, who will share an overview of ShotSpotter. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will be available to answer any questions you have or simply listen to any feedback you'd like to provide on this technology. I'll now turn it over to Ron and Trish, and thank you for being here tonight to give information on ShotSpotter.
Thank you, Chief. On behalf of Ron and myself, as well as all of us at ShotSpotter, we thank you guys for the opportunity tonight to come in, talk to the community about the solution, and answer questions they have to learn more about how ShotSpotter can help the City of Grand Rapids and the Grand Rapids Police Department address gun violence. Leading our discussion this evening will be Ron Teachman, my colleague. He is our Director of Public Safety Solutions, and he's going to take everyone through a brief 15 to 20-minute presentation, and then we'll be here to answer any questions you guys have.
Thanks, Trish. Thank you, Chief, and thank you everyone who's watching this tonight. Your involvement, your engagement is critical for GRPD to be successful in what they do to protect the community. I'd like to begin by just telling you a story. What's very likely to happen tonight in some neighborhood in Grand Rapids. While most of us are asleep, there'll be gunfire. as Grand Rapids is like most other cities in the country, it's very, very likely that no one will call 911. And since your officers don't know about the gunfire, they won't respond. Unfortunately, as that scenario plays itself out over and over again, it leads to the normalization of gun violence. Perpetrators feel emboldened to shoot guns, increasing the likelihood of homicides and blood shootings, while the rest of the community live in fear, wondering why the police are not there. Well, they think the police know about the shooting. They think the police know everything because they watch those cop shows on TV, where every crime gets solved and every bad guy goes to jail. And if they think the police know, but the police don't show, what might they think about their police department? Now, we know that's not true, but you can see how perception is molded by this lack of comprehensive response. And all this creates a vicious cycle. Gun violence continues unabated. GRPD is perceived as deliberately indifferent. There's an erosion of community trust, and officers are put at risk. But it doesn't have to be like this. We say, what if there was a way to address your concerns about officer safety, public perception, community trust, and mostly violence reduction? With ShotSpotter, this story has a different outcome, because with ShotSpotter, when someone fires a gun, while there may not be any 911 call, the system enables the officers within seconds to detect the precise location where the shooting occurred, empowering them to show up promptly and meaningfully. ShotSpotter can distinguish gunshots from other noises. We'll give you an accurate location where the shooting took place, including where individual shots were fired from. And ShotSpotter will give tactical intelligence about the event and the shooters involved. We'll help protect the police, enabling them to better protect the community, assuring that Chief Payne's deployments and allocation of resources, data-driven, intelligence-led, and perceived as legitimate. And this will lead to a safer community. ShotSpotter will direct the police to the crime scene location in near real time. It'll multiply the value of existing technologies and gun violence reduction strategies. And it builds a stronger connection between the police agency and the people that are served. For example, just on this point with the community, Cincinnati, Ohio, shortly after installing ShotSpotter, conducted their own survey. And what they found, as you can see on the screen, is there was a significant increase in a number of areas. Whether the police treat gunfire as a priority, whether people are satisfied with the job the police are doing, and whether ShotSpotter is effective. 95% said it was an effective way to reduce crime. 90% of the Cincinnati community said it's a good use of taxpayer money. 89% said they would recommend it to other neighborhoods. And in fact, after the survey, Cincinnati has expanded their coverage. We also hear testimonials from other communities as well, and I'll just give you a quick sampling. Like the woman in Columbus, Ohio, who knows about a situation where the Columbus police were able to respond and save someone's life, and there was no call to 911 for that incident. Similarly, people in Denver know that it has a deterrent effect and helps reduce the shooting. And in Pittsburgh, community residents have expressed their deep appreciation that the city of Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh police brought ShotSpotter to their area. By the way, just by introduction, my name is Trishettis Ron Teachman. I've been with the company over 5 years, but before that, I was associated with ShotSpotter as a client because I installed ShotSpotter in both cities where I served as chief of police. In fact, that's how I first met Chief Payne when I was the chief in South Bend, as well as my hometown in New Bedford. And both those cities have success with ShotSpotter, and they're still clients today. But I joined ShotSpotter 5 years ago to have conversations with folks like you to help bring this technology to cities like Grand Rapids. At ShotSpotter, helping law enforcement to make communities safer from gun violence is not just our business. We're passionate about how our products contribute to a safer world, and that's ingrained in the culture of our company. We've been helping to make cities safer for over 24 years and currently serving over 100 cities across the country, many similar in size to Grand Rapids. We have a 97% customer satisfaction rating and our 35 patents distinguish us in the public safety industry. So why is it that we're considering, and the city's considering, bringing ShotSpotter to Grand Rapids? Well, the fact is, as GRPD understands, over 80% of gunfire never gets reported to the police. And here are some sample statistics from other cities where there were gunfire incidents and no corresponding 911 call. And even if someone does call, they're often some distance away, they can't provide much information, and the call's delayed because they contemplate whether to call, and they got to go through the call taker to the dispatcher, and critical time is lost. And this also begs the question, why is it that community residents don't call the police? Well, part of what Trish and I do is, as we're installing our system into a city, we hold community meetings, not just virtually, but sometimes in person. And we ask the question, why is it when you first hear the gunshot, do you call? When they say no, we say, why not? Here are 4 common reasons we hear why community residents, perhaps like you, don't call the police. People say, I'm not sure it's gunfire. Could be fireworks or backfire or some other noise. I don't want to be the person crying wolf. They say, I hear it. I look out my window, I don't see anything. It's probably some distance away. I assume someone closer to the event will call the police with more information. Why make a redundant call? Third reason, powerful one, I'm afraid. They say, I'm afraid if I call the police, they send a squad car to my door. And what if the shooter sees that? I might be the target, my family might be the target tomorrow. And the last reason, equally troubling, I've given up. Why would I call the police? I never see them when I hear gunfire. And you can understand why they don't respond, because they don't know. So those are the 4 most common reasons, not only reasons, but 4 most common. Here's what happens in Grand Rapids and cities that do not have ShotSpotter today. When someone fires a gun, the police wouldn't know about it because nobody calls. Or the police might drive by or worse, stumble into the gunfire unprepared. And if someone does call, where do you think we send the police officer? Well, we probably send the police officer to the only address we're certain of, and that's where the caller lives. So now the officer is driving through the hot zone, not knowing where the gunfire is, and people looking, saying, why isn't the officer stopping? It also puts the officer at risk. So now the officer's at the caller's address. How far away is that? Well, we've studied this with our clients, and the average distance from the caller to the crime scene is quite some distance away, 780 feet. That might be a couple of streets over, not getting to the right scene. While the officer is talking to the caller, not getting any evidence from witnesses or forensic evidence, can't solve the case. And if someone does get shot, they're not giving critical first aid and first responder care because they're almost 800 feet away. Without comprehensive data about gunfire, Chief Payne and his command staff only know about the tip of the iceberg. And you can't manage what you can't measure. Also, this lack of effective and comprehensive police response fuels negative perceptions that I talked about earlier, diluting community collaboration and engagement. Without a comprehensive police response, there's a normalization effect, a desensitization and accommodation to gun violence. And that reduces quality of life, such as kids not allowed to use playgrounds near their homes, or even leave their home after school because parents or grandparents are afraid of the gun violence. It also leads young men to join gangs or groups for their own protection or that of their family. But ShotSpotter gives you the opportunity for different outcomes. Now when someone fires a gun, even if no one called the police, the system allows the police officers in Grand Rapids within seconds to detect the precise location where the shooting occurred and respond quickly and effectively. When someone fires a gun in the coverage area, the officer would hear this sound on their device, desktop, laptop, phone, tablet, or even a watch. Here's an example of an alert as would be displayed on the Grand Rapids Police laptop in a squad car, for example. You notice the alert contains a satellite view of the situation, the number of rounds fired, and the location within a 25-meter radius, the nearest street address, so you can put that into the record keeping. We give you the exact time of the shooting, even to the millisecond. If the event involves multiple shooters or a high capacity, which means they shot more than 10 rounds without stopping to reload, we'd also tell you if there's a fully automatic weapon involved as well. And we give the police a timestamp for each individual shot and the sequence of the shots fired. And that's particularly important if there's multiple shooters shooting at each other. We want to determine who's the primary aggressor, who started this, who should be held most responsible. So how does the system work? Well, Chief Payne said I would address that. So we would come to Grand Rapids and build out a sensor array, a dome of protection, if you will, with acoustic sensors installed up on rooftops of buildings or high up on utility poles, away from street noise. And then, after installing the system on rooftops, particularly in utility poles, then when someone fires a gun, the sound of a muzzle blast radiates outward and hits the sensors at measurably different times. By triggering the sensors, the machine classifier initially determines that it's gunfire or not using artificial intelligence based upon our years and years of experience determining gunfire from other noises. And then triangulation, or more correctly, multilateration, where various sensors are engaged, that time stamping, that differential of time, is how we determine location. And then that data is relayed to our incident review centers, both in the East Coast and the West Coast, where humans add their expertise to the machine classifier. And they go through a series of steps that I'll explain briefly to distinguish gunfire from other noises. We don't want to be dispatching Grand Rapids Police on other noises like jackhammers and snow plows hitting the ground and things that go bang and boom in the city of Grand Rapids. So one thing they do is they listen to the recording of the gunfire, and to the trained ear, you can distinguish from fireworks because fireworks have a on the back end. And they look at the acoustic signature that the computer generates. And gunfire is spiky. It's a quicker and almost like an inverted Christmas tree. And then they look at the sense of participation. They see which senses were engaged in the event. And a key difference is if I set off a firework, that emanates omnidirectionally. In other words, it goes out in a big circle and all the senses are uniformly involved. But if I shoot a gun, there's direction to that event. And while a couple of senses behind me might hear it, more senses downstream would be engaged. And that's another key test for the humans to determine. So we're very accurate in distinguishing gunfire. All of that, from trigger pull to dispatch, takes less than 60 seconds. And the officers are now dispatched with tactical intelligence they need to better protect the community. Simultaneously, all that is sent out to the 911 communication center in Grand Rapids, to the squad cars out in the field, to the officers' phones, and even to their smartwatches. And we're able to perform on both platforms, Android and iOS. So whether you have a Samsung or Apple phone, for example, all the officers can clearly get the dispatch. In addition, we'll give Grand Rapids our service promise in writing. We'll detect 90% of external unsuppressed gunfire over 25 caliber within a 25-meter radius. We give notice to the police in under 60 seconds from trigger pull. We'll be in service to the police 99.9% of the time. This is particularly helpful to have redundant incident review centers. Now, at this point, you may be wondering how accurate and timely is ShotSpotter. Well, last year we heard probably millions of bangs and booms, and filtered through all those in the process I explained and published to our clients over 141,000 qualified alerts. Now, we did that with a 97% accuracy rate, a false positive rate of just 0.5%. And we sent those alerts out on average in just 34 seconds. So from the time someone fires a gun in a half a minute, we have somebody on the way to the scene. ShotSpotter protects the police so they can better protect the community, protects the plan, and explain that in a minute, and protects the public. Let me talk for a moment about protecting the police and positioning them to better protect the community. Again, here's an example of a gunfire alert. Now, if the officer clicks on the blue arrow, as you just did, they'd hear the recording of the gunshots. And by clicking on this blue street view icon, we'll take the officer to Google Maps and be able to canvass and survey the entire crime scene. So now the officer can pick a landmark building and make their approach based upon that and not have to spotlight their location or try to find their way to a particular address. So much more efficient for them to respond quickly and effectively. The officers can acquaint themselves with the gunfire data prior to coming to work, regular duty, overtime, or extra duty. For example, if I just worked yesterday and I'm a GRPD officer coming to work later tonight, I can look at my phone, for example, and see what's occurred in the coverage area over the last 24 hours. I've been off for 2 days on my regular days off. Well, I'll just click on 24 and go to 3, and you can see how it populates. I've been off for a week's vacation, click again, and I can see how much gunfire has occurred. And I can just click on any of those yellow balloons, and it takes me to the description of the incident, and I can further read the police report, be fully acquainted, because we want our officers to know their community and know what's been going on in the community so they can better protect the community. We also want Chief Payne and his command staff, Deputy Chief Reifenberg and Kittle, to have data at their fingertips on how they distribute personnel and other resources. Here's an example of a coverage area over 24 hours, 3 days, and 7 days. I think all of us can clearly see where any discretionary resources should be dispatched. ShotSpotter directs the police to the crime scene in real time, multiplies the value of existing technologies and other gun violence reduction strategies, and build a stronger connection between the police and the people. When someone fires a gun, the officers are directed right to that location. That gives them the chance to work the crime scene, talk with witnesses, and gather evidence. And that evidence collection is really important to solvability and identifying who the people are that are responsible for creating chaos in your neighborhoods. Last year, the Urban Institute, separate from ShotSpotter, did this independent study about the effectiveness of gunshot detection. And that study showed an improvement from 50 to 89% in shell casing recovery in homicide cases where there was gunshot detection and a firearm involved. An improvement from 12 to 41% in shell casing recovery in robbery cases involving a firearm with gunshot detection. And since your officers now know where and when the gunshots occur, they can use ShotSpotter data to effectively inform collateral programs, such as street outreach. Where should our street outreach workers be located? What neighborhood should they be sent to? Which neighborhoods are the most tense? Where's the violence occurring? Well, we don't have to wait for homicides and blood shootings and other crimes. Just on the gunshots, you look at the data, we can dispatch them effectively. Similarly, what groups are involved in most of this? Gangs, if you will. We can do focused deterrence on them and not distribute our policing citywide. We can be more effective, more precise in our policing with gunshot data. And also, we can take the data of where the gunshots are occurring and share this with our school officials. And the reason why I say that is we know a lot of our kids are exposed to trauma, all kinds of trauma, with domestic violence, other abuses, but also gun violence in the neighborhood. And so we take the ShotSpotter data, we share it with our school officials, and they can determine what addresses have been involved in a lot of the gunfire, identify those kids at risk, and get them the clinical care, the trauma-informed care that they need and deserve. Well, back to the community at large. Now with ShotSpotter, when that resident looks out the window, where she never saw a police officer historically, now she sees a response from the Grand Rapids Police, a timely and effective response. Fast enough, perhaps, to get there to make an arrest on scene, or at least have enough information to lead to solving the case to hold those responsible. And this is the essence of precision policing, as I said. Removing the serial shooters, the threat to society, without over-policing the community. Since so few individuals are responsible for so much of the gun crime, removing those serial shooters has a significant impact on the safety of the community. They'll also see the officers attend to those gunshot victims, offering life-saving first aid and preparing those victims for transport to the hospital. Independent studies have also shown that victims located based on ShotSpotter arrive at trauma centers several minutes faster than just from 911. As they say in the hospital, time is tissue. They'll see your officers set up the crime scene, interviewing witnesses, gather that forensic evidence to be submitted for analysis to help solve those cases. But before the officers leave the crime scene, we're going to train them and ask them to take one small but critical step, and that is to go a couple of houses in each direction around the crime scene and knock on doors or ring doorbells. And that resident that used to look out the window and not see a response when she heard gunfire, she answers her door. And a Grand Rapids officer or two would be standing there and say something like this. Ma'am, I'm sorry if I woke you. I realize it's now almost 3 o'clock in the morning. But I'm guessing those gunshots next door woke you. Are you okay? My partner, Eric, and I are here because we care about you and your family. Do you have children at home? Were they awakened by the gunfire? Do they need to speak to a police officer to feel safe? Eric and I don't want to see a child sleeping in a bathtub tonight, afraid to sleep in their own bed. Don't be alarmed if you see flashlights for the next few minutes. Officer Kittle, Officer Riffenberg, and Officer Payne and I are going to be checking to make sure that no one is hiding in your car or under your porch, that no stray bullet hit your house or your car. We're not going to leave your property tonight to assure that you and your family are safe. I can see you're apprehensive to talk to me. Perhaps you're afraid, and I understand that. So let me give you my business card. Here, my cell phone number is on there. Maybe give me a call later and tell me what's going on with that house next door or what's happening on your street. And whatever you tell me can be kept confidential. But the better informed I am, the better guardian I can be. Now, I visited Grand Rapids PD a number of times, and I met several of the officers, and I know the command staff, and I know that they have police officers in Grand Rapids that would want to have that conversation. 911 is not given that opportunity, but ShotSpotter will. Furthermore, based on our surveys, 81% of the agency see improvement in police-community relationship after installing ShotSpotter. So how does gunshot detection lead to a reduction in gun violence in cities like Grand Rapids? Well, more detections set off a chain reaction, leading to more and faster responses by the police, which leads to more evidence recovery, witness interviews, which improves the investigative process to identify and prosecute those people causing harm in our community. And that leads to gun crime reduction and deterrence, resulting in a healthier Grand Rapids. Now, I'll very quickly go through just a couple of cities and show you some of the impact we've had in our client cities. And this is right on our website, shotspotter.com/cities. You can also go there and see all the cities that were installed in it, shotspotter.com. /results, shotspotter.com/cities. But here's what you see on the website. Greenville, North Carolina, a 1/3 reduction in injuries. Chicago lowered their shootings by 40%, Cincinnati by 48%, and these had been historically the most violent cities in Chicago and Cincinnati. While Oakland lowered their shootings by 2/3. Further down on the website, look at homicide reductions, such as a 25% reduction in Fort Myers, 29% reduction in West Palm Beach, 32% reduction in San Diego, 35% reduction in Miami, 36% reduction in Pittsburgh, and a 46% reduction in Camden County. You protect your public with ShotSpotter, and you have a better outcome. When you make ShotSpotter part of your gun violence reduction effort in Grand Rapids, you empower your community policing strategy, create a new normal, and you make your community safer. And with that, I'll turn back to the sergeant to take calls from the community and Facebook. And Trish, if you have any further comment before we take those Q&As.
No, thank you, Ron.
Okay, Sarge?
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Payne I think he's got some things for you and a little bit of information before we start taking calls. Chief?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ron and Trish, for that presentation that you gave, very comprehensive, that tells what ShotSpotter is about. There's a couple of questions that have come up about ShotSpotter that I'd like to try to address for some that may be out there, may have the question. And one of them one of the question is as far as the funding is concerned, we have been working very closely with the county on trying to get funding through the CARES Act for crime prevention. Our legal team has worked with their legal team. At this point, we don't believe that the CARES funding qualifies for ShotSpotter. However, with that said, there are other things in our operations that we could utilize CARES funding for. So that's kind of separate. There's been $500,000 set aside for crime prevention within the Grand Rapids Police Department. If it's not for ShotSpotter, we do have other operational things that we can use that money for. So we will find funding for ShotSpotter within our budget if we're able to move forward, which is only contingent. Second part of that is on city commission approval. We will have to take this before fiscal and also the entire city commission and get approval because it is new technology that is coming, that would come to Grand Rapids, and we would have to get approval for that. Thus, that's why we're holding these town hall meetings and trying to engage with the community to be as transparent as we can. I've mentioned in my opening that this is not the wand, the magic wand that is going to reduce all the gun violence we're seeing, but I do see it as a very important part of everything that is possible for us moving forward and reducing the amount of violence that is occurring within the community. I'm equally excited or thankful to the county commission. There's $500,000 dedicated to the Grand Rapids Police Department for crime prevention, but they equally put up $500,000 for community-based programs. I will partner with all those programs that are approved through that process and to work on crime reduction strategies throughout the city. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sergeant Adams, and we can start some of the feedback on ShotSpotter and also answer questions. Ron and Trish will be here for the remainder of the evening to be able to answer questions. And I want to thank the community, those that have tuned in, because it is very important that we receive your feedback as a part of our strategic plan. All these things are incorporated in our strategic plans, the technology, community engagement, getting feedback. So it just aligns with our strategic plan that we put forward earlier. With that, Sergeant Adams.
Thank you, Chief. While you're talking about budget and money, I'm gonna. That's a perfect segue into our first question from Facebook. How do you prevent gun violence if you are investing in reactive solutions versus preventive measures that address some of the core issues that cause violence? You've talked this week about money available for such programs. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's not either or. You can only have one. Again, as I mentioned, there's $500,000 out there for prevention, for community base. I'm ready to partner with any group that is submitted and hopefully get approved for that. It's not either or, but we do have a role in law enforcement to respond to gun violence that is occurring. That is not a role that I would want civilians responding to. ShotSpotter will make us more efficient and effective in responding to those type of complaints. But I fully embrace the prevention part of it. And then I'll take ShotSpotter to another level. Even though it may seem reactive, if we're able to lock a person up, as Ron mentioned earlier, of individuals that are out there creating chaos, that's perpetuating this gun violence in the community, I think that's as preventative as reactive. My choice would be is that those other programs would stop those that want to engage in that type of activity. But the reality of it is our job as law enforcement for those that elect not to be part of those programs. It is our responsibility to hold them accountable for the violence that we're seeing.
All right, thank you, Chief. Why don't we take our first question from the community from the call queue. We're here to listen and answer your questions about this technology. You can participate by calling area code 616-456-3523 or asking a question on the police department or city's Facebook pages. So we'll take our first caller from the phone queue.
Good evening, caller. You're on the air with ShotSpotter Town Hall. If you're still listening to this meeting, can you please turn that volume down? You'll have 3 minutes to provide your feedback, comments, and questions. Can you please start with stating your name and the city you live in? And your time starts now.
Good evening. My name is Jeremy. I'm a nurse in Grand Rapids. I have a statement and also a question directed for Chief Payne. So thank you for your time. Many Grand Rapids-based organizations, along with many individuals living in the Third Ward, have expressed disdain for the decision to install a spot shooter in the community. So I know they still have to vote for it. Christina Freeman, Political Affairs Director for Justice for Black Lives, has stated the amount of money it will take to not only install a spot shooter, but to maintain it can be better used. For instance, training unarmed drug counselors for the city of Grand Rapids is one way that the initial $500,000 could be utilized. I know that it's not going to be funded by the CARES Act, but still that money could go towards unarmed drug counselors instead of spot shotters. So Chief Payne, here's my question for you. Could you please provide the community endorsements that you have received from the local community leadership and organizations, specifically those located in the areas which you are planning to implement the surveillance program? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Again, we're in the process of getting feedback now. We presented this to our public safety committee, and they unanimously endorsed ShotSpotter in moving forward, and that's made up moving forward with the discussion to move it to the commission level. So that's one commission that we had. I also presented it to my police chief advisory team, who are throughout the that's represented throughout the community, and they also thought it was a step also in breaking the cycle of violence, and they endorsed it. But I guess anecdotally, I've talked to many people in the community asking, what are you doing about this level of violence? And when I talk about ShotSpotter, what I have received is positive feedback from it that we are doing something, as Mr. Teachman put in his presentation. I don't want a community that feel that we're not responsive to what is occurring within their neighborhoods. And this is just one other example of how we could better respond and be proactive in engaging the community and also letting them know that we care about what's going on in their neighborhood with the level of violence.
Thank you, Chief. We'll take the next question from our Facebook followers. And this one I think will probably be directed towards Ron or maybe Trish, kind of a technical question. How are you intending to put them on high buildings? The areas of the neighborhoods where the majority of our shootings occur do not have high buildings. How would you deploy ShotSpotter in those neighborhoods without high buildings?
So I'm happy to answer that one. We mount our sensors on rooftops and utility poles. We try to get government buildings first, if there are any, right? Or school buildings, anything that's a municipal property. And then we go on to look for private, commercial, and residential permissions. And then utility poles are what we use to supplement all that. In some cities and some neighborhoods and cities that we're in, we have deployed 100% on utility poles. Get high up on the poles, high up as we can get. But in some topographies, that's what makes the most sense for our sensor arrays to be able to detect gunfire accurately.
Thank you, Trish. Let's go back to the phones for our next caller, Alan.
Good evening, caller. You're now on the air with the ShotSpotter team. If you're still listening to the can you please turn that volume down? You'll have 3 minutes to provide your feedback, comments, and questions. Can you please start by saying your name and the city you live in? Your time starts now.
Hello, my name is Martha Cooper. I'm a resident of Grand Rapids. I tried to call in at the last one, but you guys actually did not take my call. You disconnected after saying that you were going to take calls. So I won't waste time. I'm not in favor of this flat spotter. I also want to state that I believe this is going too fast. It's going during the election week. The community is not as well informed as they could be. We're getting a sales pitch from somebody that wants to make $500,000, but we're not getting the other half of the story, and we can't possibly get the other half of the story as fast as it's going. So I want this to slow up at least a couple weeks, and I've signed a petition that other groups are also circulating. One of the things I think is really shady was when I was looking for this before, I see an article in the paper saying they're going to use coronavirus funds for this. Then I heard the police chief say that, well, no, they aren't going to use coronavirus for this funds for this directly. So now I'm starting to wonder if they're really just playing a shell game with the money, figuring out that this money will be okay to spend on the things we were going to spend on anyway, but we're going to save our money and spend it on spot charter once we get these other things taken care of. I don't know. But it seems to me like it's a money shell game so that they can get new technology toys. This is all happening directly after many people were coming and saying, defund the police. Now I'm starting to feel like our police are so afraid of being defunded that they're making it look worse than it is, and it's bad enough. But instead of handling the back end, we know that jailing people did not stop gunfire, it did not stop robberies, it didn't stop murders. But we can keep jailing people. But I don't want to see $500,000 could be going to communities that are affected by the violence. This community that is affected the most has been defunded. Long time they've been not getting their share of funding. And now we are seeing the results of that. Hopelessness and nothing to do. I would much rather see $500,000 on youth programs and youth jobs. I would like to see more money for transportation so these kids can have something to do and to be productive. There are ways that we can design programs that the community could be funded to stop violence instead of the police. I highly object to this. I think it's obscene, and I want to know, how is the money getting shifted around? If they're not going to take it out of the coronavirus fund, are they funding other programs and other, what does he call that again, strategies, so they can just take the money that we would like to have?
Caller, your 3 minutes is up. We appreciate your feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, I feel like that was a question that was addressed a little bit earlier on the budgeting issue. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
It really, as I mentioned, there are, as equally as I'm appreciative of the county commission setting aside money toward GRPD for crime prevention, I'm also appreciative that they've set aside $500,000 for community-based initiatives that organizations were able to apply for. So I'm looking forward to working with them directly also. I think it's not an either or, one or the other. I am looking to reduce that or break that cycle of violence that we are seeing. And it is very real. I get the calls about it, about the violence that we're experiencing in Grand Rapids, and ShotSpotter is something I'm looking to utilize to reduce if I get when we present to commission to get approval to move forward with.
All right, thank you, Chief. Going back to our Facebook followers, this question's a two-parter, and this will go back to Ron and Trish, more of a technical question. Sounds bounce off objects. How does that affect the directional gunfire sound and detection? The second part is, what is the rate of false positive alerts?
Thank you, Saj. I'll take that. So the first part of the question is, yes, there's deflection and there are echoes. There are a host of things, which is why our system is extremely sophisticated. I gave a rather simplistic explanation about the triangulation. But what we do before we activate the service before GRPD becomes a subscribing client is we test the system. And our algorithms, our scientists, our engineers have built a system that's capable of including those deflections, those bounces, those echoes, and negates it and calculates for it. But that's also why we like to be up on high on buildings. First, to get away from ambient street noise, but it gives us a clearer line on the acoustic travel, if you will. It doesn't have to be line of sight, but having our sensors placed strategically throughout the city counteracts some of the effects you talked about. So that's the first part. Repeat the second part, please.
What is the rate of false positives on alerts?
Sure. So as I said earlier in the presentation, based on those agencies that search for ground truth, that is to say, if they get a dispatch from ShotSpotter to go to the scene without training, and I know the chief would drive this through the organization, best practice is if you don't see something obvious, you stop where the dispatch is, where the dot on the map is, and you get out and you investigate. You canvas the neighborhood, you talk to people. You check the area for we call ground truth, things like spent shell casings and other physical evidence, and determine if there's gunfire. But the absence of that doesn't always mean it's a false positive. It's a false positive when you have conclusive ground truth that it was some other noise source. Like you see firework debris, or a witness comes out of the house and says there were kids setting fireworks where you're standing. And what happens then is our clients come back to us, and we record those false positives, and we make those adjustments in the computer system and the training of our personnel. But that's why last year, as I said, with over 141,000 qualified alerts, our false positive rate was just 0.5%.
All right, thank you, Ron. Let's go back to the call lines. Alan, we'll take the next caller in the queue.
Good evening, caller. You're now on with, can you please turn the volume down, please? Okay. Yes. You're now on the air with the ShotSpotter Town Hall. You'll have 3 minutes to provide your comments, feedback, and questions. You can please start with your name and the city you live in. Your time starts now.
Hi, Ben. I live in Grand Rapids. I had something I wanted to bring up. So I believe in your presentation, you said ShotSpotter guarantees an accuracy of 80%. But during the trial of Michael Reed in 2016, ShotSpotter reported Reed's alleged crime was a block away from the actual location. Paul Green, a forensic analyst with ShotSpotter and expert witness in the trial, admitted that the guarantee of accuracy was invented by the company's sales and marketing team. On the witness stand, he said, "Our guarantee was put together by our sales and marketing department, not our engineers. We need to give them, customers, a number. We have to tell them something. It's not perfect. The dot on the map is fully silently." So my question is, how can we trust the statistics you provide in your sales pitch to the Grand Rapids community when under oath you guys have admitted that the numbers that you're pitching are not really accurate when you look at the data, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trish, you want to take that or you want me to handle it?
Sorry, Ron, I was on mute. I'll kick it off and then you can tie it all together if I leave something out. So we take our service level guarantee very seriously. We actually measure that, and we actually do better than detecting outdoor unsuppressed gunfire 80% of the time. And we took it up to 90. We felt so strong about it. And we do that in under a minute. And we do measure that. So we look at each client agency and see where are they falling? Are we meeting that guarantee? And then on us, if we don't meet that guarantee, we have financial penalties built into our contract. So we try to give the agency not only our promise, but we back it up.
And I'll just add to that. I'm not familiar with the case that the caller's referring to, but I did hear the caller say it was from 2016. So we're talking 4 years ago in a technology field that advances rapidly. But to echo what Trish said, our service level agreement is not just a marketing pitch. It's what we put into the contract. And there are what the lawyers call liquidated damages. That is, if we don't meet our agreement to provide 90% notification of external unsuppressed gunfire with 25 caliber and be accurate within 25 meters, if we don't meet that standard over a period of time, like say in a monthly review, then Grand Rapids gets free service. Then we don't get paid. So our promise is sincere, it's in writing, it's contractual, and we stand behind it. Next question, Sergeant.
Thank you, Ron and Trish. Next one I'm going to direct to the chief. This comes from our Facebook followers. There's actually a couple of followers who have essentially the same question. How will we prevent our officers from escalating a situation or getting into a violent encounter, responding to a shot spotter alert if there is actually no shooting?
Well, I think that goes back to Ron's just the explanation he just gave on the accuracy of the system of shot spotter coming in or being implemented and the detection of gunfire occurring. What I believe it will do will show the neighborhoods that we are there, we are responding, and we are more strategic in our response as opposed to going to a neighborhood and like a 4 or 5. It's not uncommon that we have calls of shots being fired and not knowing exactly where it occurred at. It's not uncommon for us to even have homicides that occur where the victim shows up at the hospital and that now we have to backtrack and try to find out where the incident occurred. As far as putting officers at risk, it'll all be part of the training and response to shot spotter alerts that come in, and getting officers there as soon as possible and letting the neighborhood know that we are there to respond, I think is crucial in building that trust within the neighborhood that we do care about what's happening in the neighborhoods.
Thank you, Chief. For everyone listening out there, again, those who still want to call in, remember that phone number is 616-456-3523. And if you are in need of English-Spanish translation, we do have that available. So again, we encourage you to give us a call. Let's go back to the call line. Alan, for our next question for our panel.
Good evening, caller. You're now on the air with the Shot Spotter Town Hall. If you're still listening to the meeting, can you just please mute that volume? You'll have 3 minutes to provide your feedback, comments, and questions. Can you please start by stating your name, the city you live in? Your time starts now.
Thank you so much for taking my call. I appreciate it. And thank you for holding this town hall as well. Community input, of course, is very important. I think it's very interesting that the sales team here has said that someone under oath has essentially lied and not told the truth, and that their sales team does not come up with their numbers. But essentially my question is not related to that. That was just a comment. During the November 2nd town hall in regards to the $500,000 allocated to the GRPD, Chief Payne stated that the funding, if approved, will go towards our overall crime reduction strategy of gun violence. We will utilize all of the funding for all the eligible and legal expenses consistent with the CARES Act, end quote. So if that money is not being put towards the shot spotter specifically, please list the specific items you are planning on using the allocated funds for. And I understand that there's been some miscommunication because MLAD has reported that the $500,000 will go towards shot spotter, but you've made it very clear, Chief Payne, that that's not what the money is for, and it's going towards other things. But I'm sure you have an idea of what things you are planning on using that money for, since it's not being used for specific CARES-related things, which is what it was intended for. And with that, I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have been working quite closely with our legal team in our city attorney's office and also the county legal. And what has been determined at this point is that the money could not specifically be used for shot spotter. I've also reported out on Operation Safe Neighborhoods that we have used officers, additional officers. This is a point of resources that I have available to be able to utilize. In just one weekend, we spent over $100,000 where we took 10 illegal guns that were involved in criminal activity off the street. Right now, I do not have the dedicated where the money would go for, but that would be an example where the money could be utilized and supplementing the amount of officers in crime prevention that we have had operations in the past, and then moving forward until we break this cycle of violence. I mean, it's 10 minutes before we started our town hall on Monday, I was notified of a shooting that occurred, and today I was notified that the subject passed away, that had died from that shooting. This is what we're looking to work toward to reduce that amount of violence. It's not acceptable in any community. Again, ShotSpotter is not the magic wand that's going to solve all the problems. I'm encouraged about, and hopefully there will be some programming done outside of the police department that will work toward reducing the cycle of violence that is occurring. But we continue to work with our legal teams on how this money, and also our fiscal department, on how the $500,000 that's been dedicated to the Grand Rapids Police Department from the CARES funding would be utilized. That is yet to be determined.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to stick with you for the next question from our Facebook followers. This is kind of a two-parter, as a number of people are inquiring about. The first part is, how will you be taking this information from the town halls and the other sources for people in the community to give feedback and use that information in your decision to move forward? And the second part is, it's been said in the past that we're looking at a 2-year contract for ShotSpotter. What metrics would you use to measure how the program is being utilized during those 2 years to decide whether or not to keep it? You're still on mute, Chief.
As far as the feedback, that's why we're doing this, is to gather the information. We'll take the feedback from Monday's town hall, this town hall. Again, the public safety committee that we presented to, feedback from the police chief advisory team. I've asked, I would like to get more information from our captains who work directly with neighborhood association. What are their feelings about ShotSpotter? All this will be part of the recommendation to move forward with ShotSpotter or to not move forward with it. Again, I have to look to something. We have to do something. This is just another tool, and it's been mentioned in our strategic plan since we initiated the draft of it, that ShotSpotter was technology that we were looking to evaluate and see how it could fit in Grand Rapids. So it's not just this week that we've come up with this concept of ShotSpotter. I met Ron Teachman when he was Chief Teachman of South Bend, Indiana, and it went back roughly 6-7 years ago, I believe, where we took our public safety committee down to talk about ShotSpotter. So it's not just a new concept that we come up with. The metrics that we would look at, Ron did not go into a lot of detail with it, but what I'm encouraged about is that we use a system called NIBIN, which is a national ballistic system that evaluates shell casings. And we would look to see what impact does ShotSpotter have on our investigations. And NIBIN would be a big part of that in the collection of evidence linking guns to the violence that is occurring based on ballistics. So we will work out a metrics. As part of our strategic plan, it's mentioned in there of how we will continue to evaluate the different programs that we implement. Ron, you want to follow up?
Ron, you're still on mute. Oh.
For the sake of brevity, Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
For the sake of brevity, I didn't get into this in the presentation in chief, but in addition to all of the things I talked about as part of the subscription with GRPD, we have a customer success team will be assigned. One individual is the point person, but there's a team of folks, and they include a host of law enforcement experience from municipalities like Grand Rapids. These are former client commanders and chiefs, ATF agents, and crime analysts. And one of the things we do right at the outset, besides the training that I mentioned earlier, is we discuss best practices. We discuss model policies. One of the callers earlier talked about constitutional policing. We stress that. But we also work with the chief, given the capacity of the GRPD, to say, how do you want to measure success? What are those indicators? We would like to see that when the dispatcher acknowledges the call, there's a thread through the record keeping system to show when a case was a shot spotter alert, did it lead to evidence recovery? Did it lead to solvability? Did it help in prosecution? We also look for pre and post. What's the gun violence rate in Grand Rapids before we start? And what happens after shot spotters brought in? I gave some references from other cities where they did those pre and post analyses, and you saw the reductions in both gun violence overall, homicides in particular. We're going to work with Chief Payne and the command staff so that our key performance indicators are very transparent and readily available for the crime analysis, and he can share that with the community.
Chief, is it also fair to say, because some of the concerns and the questions have been regards to placing shot spotter in some of the neighborhoods that have already presented a concern over feelings of over-policed and things of that nature, is it also fair to say that one of the performance metrics and things that we could look at is post-event behavior, such as uses of force or internal affairs complaints coming out of a shot spotter alert, and obviously compared to false alerts and officer responses?
Yeah, it's fair to say that. What we're looking to do is, and as part of the strategic plan that we've talked about, is being more strategic in our deployment and also our enforcement efforts. ShotSpotter will allow us to be on scene more strategically and specific to where these incidents are occurring, so that we don't have the incidents where we're 4 or 5 blocks away from the actual incident, not knowing where it's occurring at, encountering people who may not be involved. That's how we've done it in the past. We have to be more strategic in our enforcement, and then also our deployment on how we're utilizing officers. So I do believe that it'll be more specific and strategic in our enforcement efforts, aiding us having ShotSpotter deploy.
Thank you, Chief. Let's go back to the call lines for our next caller. Alan, do you have somebody in the queue?
Yes. Good evening, caller. Can you please turn the volume down on your device? Okay, good evening, caller. You're now on with the ShotSpotter Town Hall. You'll have 3 minutes to provide your feedback, comments, and questions. Please start by stating your name and the city you live in. Your time starts now.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I live in Grand Rapids. And my question is mainly for Chief Payne and Ron Teachman. So in Rochester, New York, an unarmed man by the name of Sylvan Simmons, casually walking with his friend, was shot in the back 3 times by a police officer and subsequently fraudulently charged by the Rochester PD for endangering police and unlawfully possessing a weapon. During Simmons' trial, Rochester PD used ShotSpotter recordings as evidence of Simmons shooting back at the officer. But Simmons' lawyers were able to throw out the case by proving that ShotSpotter's evidence was inadmissible in court because ShotSpotter initially determined that the gunshots in the neighborhood where Simmons was shot was a helicopter. After Rochester PD talked to ShotSpotter, they changed their analysis and said that it was 3 shots, and then 4 shots, and then 5 shots. Ron Teachman was right about how ShotSpotter was used as evidence in court, but he didn't say was that when declared, that it was declared an unreliable source of information due to the subjectiveness, inaccuracy, and persuadability of these readings. Chief Payne,
We know that ShotSpotter will do anything to their data for the right price. How can our communities be assured that the GRPD will use this technology ethically and with policing agendas that have specific quantitative goals? How can we be sure that the GRPD will not use their subjective interpretation of collected data to protect their officers from accountability, reprimand, or prosecution? And Ron Teachman, how can we be sure that ShotSpotter Incorporated will not use the subjective interpretation of data to promote the expansion and or renewal of ShotSpotter contracts, given its underlying profit motive? Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you.
I guess I'll start with that. One of again, going back to the strategic plan is accountability. And I have outstanding officers working in the Grand Rapids Police Department. And I have said from the beginning, before I was even named chief, one of my priorities, I will hold officers accountable if they do something wrong. I would also defend them if they have not done anything wrong. As far as and I also praise them when they do things correctly. So accountability is a huge part of what I have done over the last year and months as being chief, and I will continue down that road. As far as the Rochester incident occurred, we have done research and looked at different things. I am not personally familiar with that incident and how ShotSpotter played into that prosecution, and maybe Ron has more information on it. With that said, it's not just myself. I think there's a lot of layers that we have put in place to hold officers accountable for their action. And ultimately, it'll be involvement of the prosecutor, but also our Office of Oversight and Accountability. So if there's technology out there, whether it's ShotSpotter or anything else, body-worn cameras that we utilize, we have to take the totality of what has occurred in that incident and present everything in full transparency on each individual incident and making a determination. And I will continue to do that. Ron, I don't know how much you can get into the Rochester incident. I am not familiar with that one.
So the client today. Okay. Here's what I can say without getting into specifics of that case. Rochester PD is still a client today. The fact that there may have, and I'll just say may have been a false positive dispatch does not necessarily lead to particular police behavior. If there was a false positive, we certainly regret that. And as far as changing the code or changing the computer, that's what we ask our clients to do if we make an error. Again, we're not perfect. It is not a perfect technology. There is no such perfect technology. There are guarantees that we give regarding our performance. But if we issue a false positive dispatch and the client finds out that it was some other noise, like a firecracker, like a jackhammer, like a helicopter, we correct the algorithms, we correct the computer, we correct the machine classifier and the human involved by making those corrections. Otherwise, particularly the computer is going to continue to make that same mistake. So it's a learning system like any artificial intelligence, and the people involved are learning and getting better all the time. So I can say that much about Rochester still being a client and about our system generally. But let me also say this. I've worked with people in the dispatch center for 38 years. Some of the finest people doing some of the hardest work. But there are humans involved in that chain of communication through 911. As I've said repeatedly, the first problem is that the community doesn't always call for a lot of reasons, so the police don't know about the gunfire. But then when people do call, the implicit bias in the system of human beings, the caller to the call taker to the dispatcher, sometimes the facts of the case get amplified. Sometimes the officers are giving inflated information that causes them to respond perhaps more aggressively. ShotSpotter is simply based on science. It's not based on any human element. There is no implicit bias in the science of the system. The only human involvement is listening to noises, looking at charts on a screen, looking at acoustic signatures. But that is colorblind, that is race blind, that is not necessarily with no knowledge of the community demographics, for example. It's simply the science of determining if a bang or boom is a gunshot. So I think you'd find our system to be a lot more effective in terms of constitutional policing.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Ron. Next question from our Facebook followers, and this might be kind of a combination, Chief and Ron. I know that you mentioned it on Monday. Is there a specific map of the area that ShotSpotter will be deployed in? Chief, you've talked before about working with ShotSpotter with analytics and whatnot. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, we're working with ShotSpotter to determine what the footprint will actually be. I think it's very, well, it's where the gun violence is occurring, is where the ShotSpotter would go in. And we have given data to ShotSpotter to get their recommendation on where it will go in. But we're looking at 3 square miles in one part of town. Exactly where it will be at is yet to be determined, but it's where we're seeing the highest level of gun violence in 1 square mile in a different part of town. But we have to put it where we will get the most effective results of where the neighborhoods are being impacted by gun violence.
Yeah.
I'm going to invite my colleague Trish. We haven't heard from her in a while. Let Trish respond, please.
So yeah, I'm just going to echo a little bit or jump on what the chief was saying. We really did look at gun crime data in Grand Rapids to plot out where the gun crime was happening. So we want the solution that we deploy in Grand Rapids, if Grand Rapids moves ahead, to be data-driven, right, and legitimate, not based on somebody's anecdotal memory of something, but based on the actual data. And by looking at that, we came up with some recommendations, and then the chief and his command staff have been looking based on what we provided at where they actually want to have it.
Okay, thank you.
And I might add, the big part of it is the feedback that I receive from the community. People, the messages I get, what are you doing about the gun violence that's occurring in my neighborhood? So all those things with data, where the incidents are occurring that we know of, recommendation from ShotSpotter will determine, if approved, where we would implement the program.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Trish. Alan, let's go back to you in the queue. Any callers still waiting to speak over the phone?
Okay. Good evening, caller. You're on with the ShotSpotter Town Hall. If you're still listening to the meeting, can you please turn that volume down? You'll have 3 minutes to provide your feedback, questions, and comments. Please start by stating your name and the city you live in. Your time starts now.
Hello, my name is Madeline. I'm a resident of Grand Rapids. I'm going to start by saying that I am a scientist, and I actually do computer systems validation for a living. And I am sure as hell not colorblind, and science is sure as hell not colorblind. And data is sure as hell not colorblind. My first main point I want to make about this system is that this is using, one way or another, whether you're sticking it in one pocket and pulling it out of another, you're trying to use CARES Act money during a time when COVID is on the increase in this state. People are out of work. Spectrum Health is almost at capacity with COVID cases. Money should not be diverted from caring for people to an oppressive system. Post-CARES Act, this ShotSpotter system is supposed to cost $149,000 per year of my taxpayer money. And based on what I've looked at on the ShotSpotter sales information, that should cover about 2 square miles. As far as I'm concerned, that is not a cost-effective use of my taxpayer money. As far as I'm concerned, you have not made an effective business case for implementation of this technology. My next major point, you've talked a lot about community trust and tried to spin this product as a way to build community trust. Well, the community has been crying out for you to build trust. We've been crying out to defund, demilitarize the police, for the police to actually live in the community. And what has been the response has been to send helicopters into the community, to increase police presence in the only primarily Black ward of the community, and to bring this shot spotter technology into the community. You say that the shot spotter will somehow magically get people to call the cops because you have all these reasons that people will not call the police. The reason we won't call the police is because the police come and they kill BIPOC people. They come and they kill and they harm mentally ill people. They kill and they harm homeless people. The police do not protect us, and that is why we do not call them. What we, the community, have asked for money to be spent on is actually to train unarmed response teams, is to fund the schools, to fund the community.
Thank you, caller. That's
to
your
fund
3 minutes.
actual mental health care. I am still talking.
That your 3 minutes are up. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go back to the Facebook followers for a question here. Apologize, just 1 second. I had it. A couple people have asked, and I'm not sure if this is a question for the chief or maybe Deputy Chief Reifenberg, who's in charge of investigations, or Ron, but questions in regards to how will the recovery of casings and firearms lead to more arrests and convictions?
Chief, you want that first? I can take it if you want me.
Well, how about Deputy Chief Reifenberg, and then if you can follow up, and then I can add in if there's more information I have. Deputy Chief Reifenberg.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. In many of these cases, what we find is that these guns are passed around and used in several of these shootings. So by being alerted faster and with a more accurate location, our officers can get on scene, recover those shell casings that are then sent to the state police and run through the NIBIN machine. And then they're tracked with where we find those shell casings in other incidents. The weapons, once they're recovered, can be matched to those shell casings, and then the shell casings to the crime. So it's a network that we often put together once we're able to collect the evidence. But oftentimes, as has been discussed this evening, when we get a shots fired call, the location is not that accurate. So shell casing recovery is extremely time intensive for the officers when we're out there. This system would speed up that amount of time. And frankly, as far as investigations go, oftentimes we have victims that show up at the hospital and we don't know where that shooting occurred. With ShotSpotter, we'll be able to locate the victims, provide medical aid faster, and get them right to the hospital in one of the ambulance services from town. The system really makes us more accurate and also will help us to take our resources and use the data from the system to deploy our resources that aren't busy other places to these locations.
And Ron?
Yes, thank you.
NIBIN up. Maybe you could run through that.
I will, thank you. And if I may just take 2 seconds to reflect on the last caller and the comment about science and what I said about being colorblind. Let me just quickly, and I'll talk about NIBIN in a second. Let's talk about the science and fire technology. Homes and businesses have smoke detectors, smoke alarms, CO2. We are comforted by the fact that science has given us those technologies to protect us, where people may not be in a position to call the fire department for rapid response to put out the fire to save lives and so protect property. We have technologies that make an automatic notification when humans are incapable of making that notification. ShotSpotter is analogous, but we listen to gunfire and respond to gunfire the way that those other technologies respond to house fires and building fires. But it's the same idea. And the idea that the CO2 system detects carbon monoxide and a smoke detector detects fire, that's what I mean by being colorblind. It's not based upon individuals. It's not based upon persons. It's detecting noises, discerning those noises as gunfire, and giving the police a chance to respond effectively. Now, about NIBIN. What you may or may not know is that because of congressional action, there is no national database on guns. So if there is a gun recovered at a crime scene, or even the forensics, such as spent shell casings, we can't always solve based upon the serial number of a gun to some national database. Unlike with automobiles. Now, in automobiles, if there's a hit and run accident, for example, the police that respond can look at the registration plate or the vehicle identification number, and they can track the ownership of that vehicle to the current owner and hold them responsible in a hit and run accident when there's bodily injury or property damage. But it doesn't work that way with guns. So what has happened is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives has become the database for forensic evidence. And that is called the NIBIN, National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. And the easiest analogy I would give you is fingerprinting. Most of us adults have had our fingerprints taken at some point in our life, and we know that there's some database someplace where those fingerprints are kept. And we watch those cop shows. You know how this works. Somebody commits a crime, and the crime scene examiners, the detectives, they find fingerprints on desktops and glass and maybe in a pool of blood or whatever on clothing. And they can take the fingerprints or even DNA, and they can match to a database and determine who the perpetrator is and hold that person responsible to protect society. So here's how it works with NIBIN, and here's what we'd like to see happen in Grand Rapids. Someone fires a gun. Now, at best, with just 911, it's unlikely Grand Rapids PD would even know about this. But with ShotSpotter, they're going to be led directly to the scene. They're going to get out of the squad cars and talk to people, gather testimonial evidence perhaps, but also going to collect forensic evidence. And even if they don't talk to anybody, they might find those spent shell casings. And they submit those casings into NIBIN. And then, subsequently, in another part of town, or even in Kalamazoo or Detroit, there might be a blood shooting. And detectives at that scene grab those spent shell casings and put those casings into the NIBIN system. The analysts in the ATF NIBIN system determine that there's a match, that the forensic evidence at both scene A and scene B are from the same gun. Now the Grand Rapids detectives go back to scene A and talk to people in that neighborhood. And they might determine that someone like a Ron Teachman just got out of jail recently, gets drunk on Saturday nights and gets out and fires his gun, or maybe he's dealing drugs out of the house and he's chasing people away. For whatever reason, comes out of his house and on occasion shoots his firearm. So now, having gone back to that scene, because they understand the significance of that first call and the connection to the subsequent homicide or blood shooting, they get a search warrant. They execute that search warrant and find the gun and arrest the perpetrator. And this is how it works. Calls that never would be called to 911 or not fully understood their value, by getting that evidence, putting it into NIBIN, and matching it to other crime scenes, is how we can identify perpetrators, solve the case, bring people to justice, and make for a safer Grand Rapids.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Ron. And thank you, Deputy Chief Reifenberg. Alan, let's go back to the call lines and any callers still in the queue with a question.
Okay. Good evening, caller. You're now on the air with the ShotSpotter Town Hall. If you're still listening to the meeting, can you turn that volume down, please? You'll have 3 minutes to provide your feedback, comment, and questions. Please start by stating your name and the city you live in. Your time starts now.
Yes, this is Kent County Commissioner Robert S. Womack, and I live in Grand Rapids. The ShotSpotter ideal is something I proposed to Kent County. It's something that came up years ago and it was turned down years ago by the city, and we continue to have the murder rate climb in Grand Rapids. The idea came from a meeting with the victim's family, with some victims' family who brought up technology as we talked about a lot of things that have failed to save lives and protect some of these African American families. So for people who don't know the McIntosh family, they don't understand that the McIntosh family has lost 9 members in the last 40 days here in Grand Rapids. If you don't know Nicholas Washington, he's the cousin of Romito Jones, who was killed at Miss Tracy. Also ran into a family member of Tommy Stewart, who was killed at Miss Tracy. We are funding everything that people bring up, from health to schools, even though we definitely want federally more money put into our schools. We are talking about $144 million. We got nonprofits that are sending out emails to have people call in, and these nonprofits have applied to us for CARES Act Stop the Violence program. Many are in line to get Stop the Violence dollars from United Way as we speak. But at the same time, they're saying don't give money out of the CARES Act to stop the violence to the Grand Rapids Police Department, who's on the forefront risking their lives to stop violence. Can't have it both ways. If that is what we need to talk about, then we need to talk about that and stop all funding for Stop the Violence program. Who wins if you block the police fund? Nobody wins for crime. $30,000 a year minimum to house each prisoner in the state of Michigan. So for one prisoner for 20 years, that's $600,000. He had 31 murderers thus far, which is going to be $18 million to house all of them if it's just for 20 years and it's not natural life. My friends, family members, and neighbors have been getting killed. They're dead. They're not coming back. We're talking about $500,000, and we're talking about 31 people dead in the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I hold nothing against the people who are trying to block the Grand Rapids Police Department because of the national political things that are going on. But I live in the 49507. Right here in the city of Grand Rapids is not only in our zip code, but people are dying. This is real. This is not playtime. And if we're going to talk about the Stop the Violence funds from Kent County, we have to talk about it in a 360-degree steer. We cannot single out the Grand Rapids Police Department. I hope you will support our police department. No one stands up against bad police officers more than me. Nobody on this phone line has marched over the last 20 years against police brutality more than me. But not all our police are bad. The majority are out here risking their life daily. And even me, one of their biggest critics, have enough common sense to know that by defunding the police, we are enriching criminals to believe that we can have slow response times like Flint and Detroit that sometimes take days. We need crime stop. Crime leads to gentrification as affluent African Americans flee for safer grounds for their children. We cannot have this violence. We need equal protection of the law. For me, this is not a game.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner, very much for not only calling, but your support of the program and leading that charge at the county level. Chief, anything you want to add to that or say to the Commissioner?
I appreciate all the callers, and I appreciate the Commissioner calling in. This is not just the police department. Again, I talk to many people, and what I am hearing is we need to break this cycle of violence. ShotSpotter is not that magic wand that has been mentioned. As the Commissioner mentioned, there's monies allocated for other programs out there. We need to look at this cycle of violence holistically and address it in many different ways. ShotSpotter is one area that I believe in that will help us break this cycle of violence, and I appreciate the Commissioner calling in. I talk to many people who want something done about this, and this is one avenue. And a lot of the people I talk to are the ones that are being impacted the most by this violence. We will seek Commission approval to bring this forward. We will also seek Commission approval to accept the $500,000 that's been allocated for crime prevention. So I appreciate everyone's feedback, even those that may be opposed to it, but I would like for them to engage more and talk more about these issues and how we can better combat it, as opposed to just turning a blind eye to the things that we're looking to do. It's been part of our strategic plan. It's been talked about for years. It is time for us to take action and to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to impact this cycle of violence.
Thank you, Chief. By my count, it's 7:30 p.m., which is the end time for our presentation. On behalf of Chief Payne and the rest of the GRPD, I want to thank Ron and Trish from ShotSpotter for taking time out of their schedules to present to our community, to answer questions, and to address concerns. It's very greatly appreciated. As I mentioned at the beginning of the evening, as part of not only the strategic plan, but the mission, vision, and values of the GRPD, a big part of that is to raise the community's voice and to make sure that they are heard and have a voice when it comes to police operations and new initiatives. And so if you didn't get your question answered tonight, or you didn't get to have your comment heard, we are still available to receive information through our Facebook page. Feel free to send us a message through Facebook, or you can email us at trustgrpd@grcity.us. All the information from Monday night and tonight and all the days in between and until it's time to present to the commission. We'll take all those questions, comments, answers, and concerns and present them in full transparency as we look to potentially move this forward. Chief, anything that you'd like to say to wrap up at the evening before we sign off? Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. If you are still in the queue with a question, feel free to stay on. City staff will stay until everyone in the queue has an opportunity to present their opinion, their information, or ask their question. And we will find a way to get an answer to you even after we sign off this evening. Chief, final comments?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you and staff for putting this together. Also, more important, the community who called in, who took their time to have their voice heard on this matter. It is very important that we break this cycle of violence. I want to thank Ron and Trish from ShotSpotter for being available to provide more technical information. Again, I've heard this presentation many times, but I'd prefer for the experts to better inform the community, and I want to thank them for taking the time to give that information out there. Again, my whole goal is to reduce this violence that is occurring in our neighborhoods, and we can only do that by working together. And it's not just one thing that will take care of this. It's on many different layers, and we have to look at every opportunity that we have to break this cycle of violence. So I want to thank everyone who participated tonight again. I want to thank the commission for eventually we will present this and for their feedback and their information, and the city manager, Mark Washington, who has been very supportive of our efforts to break this cycle of violence. So again, thank you to everyone, and I appreciate the time everyone has taken for this.
All right, thank you, Chief. Again, if you're still in the queue, city staff will remain on the line and take your information and answer your questions and record your comments. And again, if you would like to, before the next city commission meeting, feel free to send us an email, trustgrpd@grcity.us, or reach out to us on Facebook. 1 second, I'm getting a text from the deputy chief. Just want to make sure I didn't forget anything. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for that called in to reiterate what the chief said. We appreciate the community's feedback. And if there's nothing else, we will sign off from GRPD headquarters.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night.